I think almost every entrepreneur has this moment. You kind of step off the cliff. And for me, that kind of off the cliff moment was after I'd been as a consultant for 14 years. I was a deep subject matter expert in the Medicare programs and the Medicaid programs. But I just realized I didn't really understand it as well as I thought I did, because all of a sudden all my friends and family and neighbors and coming to me and asking me for advice or help. And I just didn't really understand how the policy and even the business operations were translating down to the experience of the patient and the caregiver. Like, I just was shocked. Like, I had a mental model of how I thought the healthcare system worked for older adults.
And now, from San Francisco and the UCSF Rosenman Institute, the Health Technology Podcast with your host, Christine Winoto.
I'm so excited to introduce my guest today because she's a real political maverick as well as an incredible business leader. Anne Tumlinson started her career in government working as a healthcare advisor to the one and only Congressman John Lewis. Today, she is the founder and CEO of ATI Advisory and the founder of Daughterhood. Both organizations aim to address aging and disability issues in our country. Unfortunately, there are a lot of issues. In this episode, Anne walked us through the scope of the problem, but she also talks about a lot of solutions. And some of these solutions she's already built. Here's our conversation. Well, welcome, Anne. Thanks for joining me this afternoon.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have you. I felt like you have so much of experience from being in the politics or the policy making all the way now to where you are in the not-for-profit and the for-profit side of the world. And maybe you can share with us a little bit about your journey and how you get interested in the healthcare space and why and what took you here.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. So, I didn't graduate from college with this idea that I would become a health policy expert. Back in the 80s, when I graduated, that wasn't a thing. There are kids today, right, getting their master's or their undergraduate in policy and global health and things. We didn't have any of that. So, there's public health or being a doctor. So I was really interested in social sciences, though, and I honestly had no idea what I wanted to do. I always tell people, our interns, and I just always try to say, like, if you're in college and you don't know what you're going to do, don't worry. It will all work out. But I moved to Washington, D.C. because I had some friends here. And they said, you should just come to Washington, D.C. It's so much fun. So I just got really lucky because my first job was in an office, a member of Congress, and working as a receptionist. So my first job was answering the phone. And I just got lucky because eventually there was an opening on his analyst team for somebody to do healthcare, which they gave healthcare to the most junior person because at the time it wasn't a very big deal. So like the really experienced analysts were doing like transportation and environment and like defense, and the healthcare was I got to do healthcare. Well, I can't explain what happened exactly next, except that everything just clicked for me. I found it to be just a really interesting sort of, it touches your heart because it's about people's personal lives. And then, but also it's a puzzle. I was like, we were talking at the time about national health care way back, is this Hillary Clinton and, all of these different proposals and how they would work. And I just was like, this is cool. I just liked it. Analytically, it was interesting. And so I kind of grabbed onto it, and little by little, over time, you start to build your expertise, just working on one project after another and one thing after another it takes a long time. So I went to graduate school and I did some health services research. So I learned how to do that, which is important. And then I went back into government at the White House, Office of Management and Budget. And then I got to work on these programs even more in really, really a lot of depth. And that laid the groundwork. So that was it. Healthcare, I was hooked. It was from the very beginning, I say. Just spoke to me.
Yeah. And I think that's oftentimes when you feel, I can relate to it. I feel that the personal part of it that impact a lot of people's life, easier to understand, I think. I mean, there's so many other areas that is always impacting other people's life, but healthcare, the connection is a bit more straightforward.
Yeah. Yeah.
So walk through for us in terms of, I never worked for a congressman, like being especially in a healthcare advisor when you started as a receptionist and then go okay, I'm going to have to do something in healthcare. What was that like? And what do you have to accomplish and deliver at that time? And how has that changed now when you see when somebody work in a congressman office in trying to do healthcare policy?
Yeah. I actually think it's the same. I mean, we maybe it's actually the scary thing is how much hasn't changed. So we haven't really made that much progress. I guess, the thing about being an advisor to one person who's a politician and they represent people is that your job is really always to think about what is right for my boss, what is right for this politician representing these people. So there's a really big center for aging in the district and they need funding. And so we better figure out how we're going to get funding, so just, I think back then and even today, you're just always thinking about what are the needs of the people that this member of Congress represents, whether they're Republican, it doesn't even really matter. Republican, Democrat, people have the same needs. And that's the funny thing a lot of people don't realize is it was really friendly back then. You just, I met my husband, he was in a Republican office. I was in a Democratic office. Everybody's kind of working on the same things, just from different angles. And I think that's more the same than you would imagine even today. You get past all of the bluster and all of the ugly politics, and there's still people just working to solve problems. And then you have to be willing to, what I've learned over time is that what you really need to be able to do in that environment, and especially if you're going to be working on the programs like at OMB, is you really have to be willing to learn your program at its very source. So I'm not a lawyer and you don't have to be a lawyer, but you have to start with the policy starts often in the statute. Mm-hmm. You have to read the law, and then you have to read how the agency interpreted the law. And then you have to read how the agency guides providers and everybody around. All of these pieces of documentation from the government that's your source of truth. And if you can't just go read somebody else's report and think you know it, you have to go to the source. And that I was trained to go to the source. And so that was really important. And I think just really always remembering in the congressman's office, you're representing the congressman. Like you can't, and even at OMB, like your own opinion is not important. It's the congressman or it's the president or it's the government. Like your own person is not important. And if you try to be like an advocate in those roles, you do a disservice to the role. And it wasn't until I got out of government, that I started to be able to kind of have my own voice, and my own point of view and to develop insights and things like, which I love doing. But when you're in government and especially when you're young, you don't have a right to an opinion yet.
You have to earn it.
Learn your facts, right? Just the facts. That's the thing to master at that level, and really serving the person that you're serving and being humble. And that was hard for me, but like I got it beat out of me. I was like, okay, I get it. This is not about me. And that was a good maturing. It's a very fast process of growing up, right after college.
In a way, it kind of force you to listen more because they don't want your opinion as much.
No, they just want you to know what they need to know when they need to. Like, you just have to be prepared. You could get asked anything, anytime. So whenever you're not being asked something, you better be studying. Like, you don't know. You could get a call like, what's going, there's somebody in my office complaining about something. What's the deal? And you have to know. So that's nerve-wracking. You get a stomach ache.
Yeah.
This podcast is sponsored by Brown Rudnick's Global Life Sciences Group, a team of legal professionals that help life science companies, lenders, and investors around the world turn good science into good business. Learn more at brownrudnick.com. This podcast is also sponsored by Canon Quality Group. Canon Quality Group has been helping medtech startups set up quality management systems for over 10 years. If you're unsure when to get started with quality management in your startup, turn to the experts at canonqualitygroup.com.
So you mentioned about, policies being created. The congressman, and you're serving for John Lewis, from the late John Lewis. And there's so many different there's so many different, point of view within the constituent. And how do you pick what's the right one? Is that based on what his insight, or because that could be somebody who speaks the loudest?
Yes, usually that's what it is. They're just politics really matters at that level. So who are the big supporters, and donations matter. So trying to think of like a good example. Coca-Cola is in Atlanta. Mr. Lewis represented Coca-Cola, right? So, that's like, we have to take that into consideration because it's a big employer and a big national company in Atlanta, So I remember sort of the, I'm trying. It's so funny. It's been a while, and so now I'm racking my brain to think of some of the like labor. So Mr. Lewis was very passionate about labor, the labor movement, and the labor movement supported the civil rights movement. So if there were unions that come to the office, like he was always, yay, and everybody would meet, and there's a big then the unions really supported him and they got out the vote and like he supported them. And so, they, if something was important to them, we really paid attention. And there's just some things just politically, Mr. Lewis was just like, very, just what you would expect, very, very socially liberal, very, into public programs. And so we kind of knew where he stood. There are other members of Congress who were more middle of the road and it would have been harder, but this was always pretty clear.
Yeah, I was just thinking about being in Coca-Cola and healthcare, and I'm just thinking about, Coca-Cola selling something that's probably not so healthy. How do you navigate that?
Well, you know what? Here's the funny thing. I mean, so I'm going to punt on the answer here because it was so long ago. And we didn't really, we knew sodas weren't good, but it wasn't like it is now where we're like, and honestly, this is the funniest thing. So Coca-Cola would provide Coca-Cola products for our office to give out to constituents for free. So they would come in and we'd say, hey, do you want a Coke? And, everybody's from Atlanta and they're like, yay, Coca-Cola. So I think I drank like 10 Diet Cokes a day in that office. And now I wouldn't. Now I'm like, I don't, I'm drinking water and I'm too old to drink Diet Cokes and Cokes. But yeah, I had a very bad Diet Coke habit.
Yeah. But Coca-Cola now also sell bottled water. So they have more options too. So, but yeah, so I was just thinking about the whole healthcare policy, how is that, influenced sometimes based on certain story that was told by somebody who is so passionate that can change people's mind, and then but maybe it's affecting a smaller number of people rather than the larger. The balance that you have to go through.
Yeah, no, it could absolutely happen. Mr. Lewis was in favor of universal health care long before it was cool,
Right.
Long before Bernie Sanders or, AOC or anybody. Mr. Lewis was for universal health care. So, and he would really, he really resonated with a lot of the stories of his constituents who couldn't get access to healthcare. And we did a big town hall meeting. We brought lots of people out to tell their stories. And then sometimes there'd be just one individual story, like where somebody there's something that's not working. And then we have caseworkers who come in and try to solve the individual problems, like in healthcare and other ways, like, my social security check won't come, or, there's some problem. And so lots of caseworkers to help people with those kinds of things. But absolutely. So individual stories make a huge difference. The thing is, Mr. Lewis was on the healthcare committee. So he was on the Ways and Means Committee, the health subcommittee, but I was very junior, right? So there's a whole staff of experts, very senior level people who work for the committee. Now they're the ones who are really making the decisions, So like if something was very important, so my job a lot of the times was to know, okay, Mr. Lewis, the committee hearing is coming up. Here's what they're going to be talking about. I would prepare him, give him some questions. We would talk about what he wanted to know or say or do, or if he had a strong view, then I would tell the committee staff, that was my job. He was a junior member of that subcommittee, right? So like the people who are really in charge are the chairman and his staff. And so, I personally didn't have any influence. Really at all. And Mr. Lewis didn't have a lot at the time because he was still pretty new. Mm-hmm. So, I think over time he probably had more, but yeah, I had a lot more influence in my role at the Office of Management and Budget. Like that was a very substantive role where, my job was to we were as a team responsible for putting the president's budget together every year. And that and working with the political officials in the White House. And that was you know, a really, you could really influence the way things would go from that point of view.
Based on your ability to oversee more like the broad landscape rather than just a silo of thing to balance everything else.
Yeah. The Office of Management Budget plays this role in the government where all of the other agencies have to come up through it. So, we had a lot of control over what the Department of Health and Human Services did. They had to come through these 28-year-old analysts to get their budget done. And so, looking back, talking about sort of mistakes that people like, I think we were all really young. It's one of those jobs where, it takes a lot of energy. And so it's mostly young people. And I think sometimes they miss the nuances of things, like what's the impact on family caregivers, or it's just all the budget, and how much is this going to cost? And we just were very proud of ourselves for being so green eye shade and I think, I can sort of see now that I'm older that everything is just a lot more complicated and nuanced than I realized back then. So you live and you learn.
I know as you get older, you realize the world is really gray and different shade of grays too, not just one gray.
Exactly.
And so fast forward, you have your experience with Avalier Health, and then I'm also curious about your not-for-profit, the Daughterhood, and why. Yeah. I guess I think there's a lot of interest now in what you're doing now in the aging population, and why that, and you can tell us about that.
Yeah, sure. So, since I think a lot of entrepreneurs listen to to this podcast, I would just say, I think almost every entrepreneur has this moment, and I would put myself in that bucket for a minute. I'm not a tech entrepreneur, but that moment where you kind of step off the cliff. And for me, that kind of off the cliff moment was after I'd been in a consultant for 14 years, working at Avalier, doing, working with companies and helping them understand government regulations and policy. And just I don't know how to express this except to say I was a deep subject matter expert in the Medicare programs and the Medicaid programs, the Parents of Paper Health and Long-Term Care, and, hospitals and physician groups and Medicare Advantage plans and insurance and all of that. But I just realized I didn't really understand it as well as I thought I did, because all of a sudden, all my friends and family and neighbors, and coming to me and asking me for advice or help, because I was getting to be that age and I just didn't really understand, how the policy and even the business operations were translating down to the experience of the patient and the caregiver. Like, I just was shocked. Like, I had a mental model of how I thought the healthcare system worked for older adults. And as soon as people started telling me their stories, and this just started with, a neighbor and a friend, it wasn't any formal thing. I was so shocked because I was just like, my mental model doesn't hold up. This isn't how it works. And especially the thing the sort of searing insight was that I just thought because we have this Medicare program, Medicare is a health insurance program for older adults. I thought, like, that's enough. That's good, right? It's good. Everybody who is over age 65 has health care. But that's not true. It's not true. That there's tons and tons of gaps in the program, and it doesn't work well. People aren't getting good care from this program, and families are having to set up entire systems of care delivery in their individual homes all by themselves just to navigate the healthcare and the aging infrastructure. There's no aging infrastructure. So, like, do you need meals? Do you need transportation? Do you need in-home support services? Do you need grab bars? None of that's organized on any kind of platform at all. And then you also have the medical care, which is also not organized at all, and also very poorly reimbursed. So I thought, oh, if you have money and you have Medicare, you're fine. And what I learned, and that's crazy for me to hear, I'm embarrassed, but that's just what I thought. And then I realized, no, not fine. So anyway, this was this moment where I decided I was really ready. I've been at this company 14 years. It was time to I just wanted to do my own research. I wanted to kind of bet on myself. So I left without another job, and I took on some independent consulting projects that were enough to help me pay my bills and set aside time to do what I call my field work. So daughterhood became like this ethnographic or anthropological endeavor that has actually no business model around it at all. It's not even a nonprofit. Like, I haven't even set up a 501c3. I'm on the board of 501c3s, and I look at what they do and I think that's still a business model, and it's not going to work for what we're trying to do. So we have so daughterhood kind of sits inside the research firm that has grown up around all of these insights and information and knowledge that come from this caregiver community, so that we're able to pursue research projects and funding, and whether it's commercial, for profit, or philanthropic, or whatever. We have a very wide range at ATI, and I can talk more about that, but all of it really has the daughterhood community as its foundation. So, and that's a community of people. Eventually I just started putting out content, and, eventually meeting all of these people who would read the content and wanted to be part of it. And now we have these like little micro communities all over the country called Daughterhood Circles, and an amazing group of women who lead those and are in community with each other. And so we just try really hard to kind of serve as that aggregator at the market level, helping people navigate peer-to-peer. It's just a peer-to-peer. It's just, people you become part of a community, you call people, they help you. That's what it is. Maybe it's closest to the village model, the village movement. But there's no fee or anything. So anyway, so daughterhood started that way. And then, it's grown, and it's become less about content and more about community, which I love, because producing content's really hard. And then meanwhile, my research that was just me, independent consultant, has grown to be a lot. So we have 25 employees now, and really just there's a lot of interest in the market about sort of, oh my gosh, all of these people are getting older and we're not really ready to deliver care the way they need it. So we have lots of projects.
So going back to what you're saying on the daughterhood, like about, caring for the agings, and it's becoming a community. And I think oftentimes that's what was available way back. And now with the
Right.
technology, everything is, everybody become more individualistic, everybody moves, and that community has disappeared. So is there a way for innovation that can help scale so that people can benefit from?
Oh, this is me. This is me sighing. Yes, but we're in a little bit of a chicken and an egg problem, which is like we're having trouble solve. So we really need. There's lots of room for innovation, especially technology, enable innovation to sort of support communities of caregivers. So, so we can have the best of all worlds. We can have a really efficient sort of platform and and sort of sifting of services and care navigation that absolutely we need a lot. That technology has to absolutely be the underpinning of all of it, and sort of that human connection and peer to peer, all enabled by the technology. Without question, that's where we have to go. The challenge, which I'm sure you've thought about as well, is that it's hard to scale because we don't have like a home for that. In other words, we don't have any kind of organizational structure around which we have these little daughterhood circles. Sure, technology and innovation could help us, I'm sure, like do what we do better. But what you really need is every community needs to have like a well-known sort of distribution center, for all of the services and all of the technology and all of the innovation, and that in and of itself has to be technology able. I mean, we need a genius bar in every community for caregiving, and I think that piece of it can't really be innovated because it's a shared service. It's a community service. So, for example, if every Medicare Advantage plan, there's 3,000 or more of them out there, if every single one of them could theoretically create one of these things, but then that would not solve the problem. Then we'd be like, well, which one do you go to? And how do you choose that? And it's still going to be confusing. So we talk about the need for hubs. We need in sort of infrastructure in underlying systems across which all of these innovations can travel. Sometimes I'll refer to it as like an aggregation platform. We need an aggregation. But, so maybe one of the tech entrepreneurs says, great, I can invent an aggregation platform. That's not hard, But in order for it to work, you have to have scale. In order to have scale, you have to have a way to bring everybody to just you. So nobody wants to invest in that. So it's a little bit of a conundrum, but I think that we can fix it if we bring together sort of government dollars, philanthropic dollars, and private sector dollars. I think we can create a pool of funding that can fund sort of the underlying infrastructure. And then, every family knows like, oh, this is where you go. This is the place you go. And it might not be super efficient or awesome because it's like not private sector, but it's like, it serves its purpose because then people can access all of these other sort of innovations. So anyway, I hope that makes sense.
But do you think, a company like Papa, is that what their attempt is, providing a lot of that caregiving and bringing a lot of different resources for the aging population?
So what they do is great. But they're, and I, I don't pretend to be an expert on what they're doing. So just from my vantage point, from what I can see, they're distributing their solution through Medicare Advantage plans. Medicare Advantage plans only serve half of the older adult population, first of all. Second of all, only a pretty small percentage of those plans are offering Papa. So I think as a business model, they are highly successful. Like they're a unicorn in the sense of like, I've not seen anybody else break through and get as much sort of buy-in from the Medicare Advantage plans as they have. And so that's fantastic. Those Medicare Advantage plans have a very, very small amount of money that they can devote to this. So, I think, I don't know how meaningful the benefit is. We don't have a ton of information about that yet. But so I think for the entrepreneur, it probably works. I think as a societal solution, that's not, if we could create a Papa, like, like an Apple store, like a Papa store in every community, and everybody was willing to come in and buy services from, and everybody understood, like, this is where you go, like, then that would work. That would be great. And I'd be happy for them to do it. I just think, like, as long as we have competition, you have the Papa and you have somebody else like them, and you have somebody else like them, and you have somebody else like them, you still have the same problem, which is like the caregiver's like, where do I even go? Like, let's say you're a member of a Medicare Advantage plan that has a Papa benefit. How do you even know? You're still like up late at night Googling what do I do? So it's not necessarily solving the problem of like, where do I go right off the bat for most people. But I'm thrilled. It's wonderful progress that Medicare Advantage plans are offering it and that they've been able to sell it. It's like great.
Yeah. I was wondering, I was like in Europe, there's universal healthcare, and how do they approach it? Is there the way they do it can work for where we are for taking care of the aging population? Because in Europe, everybody was saying that, we care for our aging population better than here in the US. And I grew up in Indonesia, where we take care of aging is the family take care of the parents. Yes. And there's a lot of support because we can afford it. The labor cost was lower. There's, I remember when my grandfather was old, we always have somebody with him all the time, like, personal caregiver. Yep. Same thing with my grandmother, like, and they're going to go everywhere they need to be because there's a driver that takes them everywhere they want to be. Yep. So yes, every other country does it better than we do. And there's a couple reasons why. One is that they actually have financing for services. So that's the other thing that we don't have. We don't actually have any financing for, like, there's no, most people can't afford a personal care aid in this country because there's no, they're paying for it out of their savings. So, Germany, most European countries, they have a social insurance system that pays for the services that somebody needs when they become very frail and older adult. So that's really one really important, huge gap in the United States. So, Medicare doesn't pay for it.
Medicaid doesn't, like that kind of thing. Like when you're frail and you can't get out of bed or bathe or eat or dress yourself, and somebody has to be with you all the time, the only people really available to do that are family members. That's it. So, in our society is not organized, to support for lots of caregiving. It's the opposite. And so, and then the other thing is that a lot of other countries are a lot smarter about, although, I mean, well, my understanding is that they are smarter about allowing a much more fluid immigrant population to flow across borders to be part of that workforce. So I suspect, we are going to be in a fierce competition with other countries for caregiving workforce that comes from other countries within just a matter of years. We're going to be like begging people to come from other countries to be caregivers, but we're right now politically just in this really weird place where that's not allowed. So, or it's hard, I should say. So I think, between immigration policy and so it's just a much more sort of social, there's just a lot more sort of social cohesion, social insurance, support for families, recognition of the role of immigrants in the caring workforce, all of that in other countries. And investment, like in Japan, like there's lots of investment going on right now in housing even.
Mm-hmm.
We're not doing that.
So yeah, so I'm just thinking now about like, okay, so if somebody's interested in, there's a lot of needs here. What is the opportunity for innovation that you can, I mean, I could say it's a lot, but it's just like, where should we even begin?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of opportunities for innovation. I mean, I do think that I think we need innovation around, how we organize our homes, what kinds of homes we live in, how we attach those homes to services, how we schedule and coordinate and organize services. I mean, I think there's kind of an endless array of innovations that we could bring to this space. But I think we have to just do it a little bit differently, which is that I think the challenge for entrepreneurs and innovators in aging and healthcare is that you can't, it's not like another sector where you just kind of go off and you come up with something new, and you might have a few government regulations, or your Uber, your Airbnb, you have to figure out how to deal with local housing boards and taxi boards, and that's still a thing. But in our world, I make the argument that the innovators and their funders and their incubators and all of that have to actually view the policy landscape as part of what they're doing. The innovation of service delivery, or the innovation of, communication, or, the wearables, or whatever it is that, that you're bringing some cool new technology to, has to you have to almost invent from the very first moment, co-invent the technology or whatever with the policy, with whatever that public program, like what is a conversation that we as sort of West Coast innovators are having with those East Coast policy people? Not enough, not enough, because, I think there's not a Republican or a Democrat on the Hill who wouldn't be excited about the idea of like, oh, I see. If we create a social insurance program, we're creating a flow of revenue into all of these small businesses. Like we're we're funding enterprise. We're funding, the thing that you're inventing to, help somebody avoid a fall. It ends up being something that takes us to the moon. I mean, this is what makes the country great or good or something.
Yeah.
And I think it's like you can't innovate in longevity without really thinking about that programmatic space that you're having to interact with. And
I think sometimes being the innovator entrepreneur, things move fast, and then the idea of working with the people in the policy is so painful to deal with. Yeah. And how do you break that? Because entrepreneur, probably that's why they're entrepreneur. They're not in politics because they have no patience for that.
Yep. So think about what can be paid for today with the programs, like innovate and move quickly around the things that we know we can pay for or that are approved or covered, or you can I mean, Papa's a great, not to pick on them, but that's a great example. I mean, that they were right there, right? Mm-hmm. They were watching. So they knew. So what happens is I have these entrepreneurs that come to me, they're like, wait, what's Medicare Advantage? Should I be looking at that? Is that a thing? I was over here making my thing. Mm-hmm. Whereas the Papa folks were like, oh, look at what Congress just did. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Congress just created a whole new category. Mm-hmm. We're going to make this thing that fits. Mm-hmm. So, having some knowledge of policy and programs in the world of that, you can still move quickly within the confines. And then what would be awesome is if the Papa folks, and they're doing this, go to Capitol Hill and say, like, look what we're doing. Imagine how much more we could do if, this is as far as we can go because of and then, come together with other entrepreneurs and make a point, so because nobody knows about Papa on Capitol Hill.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, a few do, but not really very many. Yeah. So we're picking on them. They're like, why are you guys talking about us so much?
So, this is great. Well, I'm so short of time, but I feel like there's a lot of things that we can talk about. Last question then is that I think you provide the insight or advice for the entrepreneurs, understanding the policy. And I think policies can be written in such a dry language. And how do you?
Oh, there's so many resources, really, really. Like, that's the thing. There's so many ATI advisories out there putting things on their websites, like don't start, like, remember how I said earlier, like you start with the source and you educate yourself. Like you don't have to do that if you're an entrepreneur. Like that's just what you have to do if you're a staffer. I think, Kaiser Health News is a wonderful resource. The Kaiser Family Foundation. There's just, and I don't have it's something fun to think about would be like coming up with a recommended reading list for entrepreneurs in longevity. I think I will do that, and I can share it with you because I have to think about it a little bit. But like, where can you go? AARP's Public Policy Institute. It's a ton of great resources. You just start to kind of, this is a really, really good one. The Medicare Payment Advisory Commission, which is called MedPAC. And they have all of these payment basics, So you can begin to get your, you don't have to be an expert, but just being aware of what some of the limitations of these programs are. And then find co-founders who know, not me, but find co-founders who know the space as well, I think.
Okay. Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Health Technology Podcast. We want to thank our executive producer, Herminio Neto, and our podcast engineer, Andrew Rojek. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. The Health Technology Podcast is available on all major platforms.